Thank you, everybody, for coming along and listening to me talk tonight. Thank you for coming and seeing my show. I appreciate all of you coming down, even if you came for the other shows and you're just kind of persisting through this one. This very non-technical talk. We will get through this for those of you that are just here for the code on screen kind of business. Let me see if I can bring you a little bit of sunshine tonight. We're going to talk about soft skills tonight. This is something that's very dear to my heart. And there's a few things here that I guess we want to cover off before we kind of crack further into it. Soft skills in this day and age are terribly important. 2019 is batshit crazy at the moment. It's a really strange time to not only be in the web industry, but in the world in general. The internet has changed an awful lot about how we communicate as people. So it's an exciting time to kind of step back and go, we're going to remove ourselves from all of social media and say, what happens when we're actually in a room with someone and looking at them face to face? Or what happens when we're dealing with someone in an environment where I have to be a person to this person? That's soft skills. There's a whole bucket of tricks that you put together that help you relate to somebody so that you and they come away not feeling awkward and awful. And so I think it's a really important time to focus on this because the energy that goes into being in this industry right now is intense more than ever. And I've seen this over a long period of time. The landscape has changed a lot and it's terrifying. If you're not spending all of your time trying to keep at the crest of the wave, you fall behind and you can feel that. That's something everybody says in quiet. When you come away from these kind of networking events, you talk to them and they'll be like, I'm quietly terrified that I'm irrelevant in 5 minutes if I'm not constantly keeping ahead with the acronyms and the buzzwords and whatnot. So we have this drive, this energy to kind of persist with the hard side of our tech stack. And I think that there's an opportunity to acknowledge that a part of that stack needs to be the soft side, the things that help us deal with other people alongside what we do as professionals in this industry. I think we can all kind of focus on this, and those of us that are really good at it, that's great. You guys can be the ambassadors to the other people who need a little bit of help with it. Those of us who are not so good at it or have room to improve, consider this a refresher course. And it is not all-encompassing. This is just a kind of a place to start. You might be thinking at this point, am I even on screen there? Damn it, look at that. That was like a really nice picture of me too. So why am I standing up here and talking to you about this right now? I've worked in this industry for close to 20 years. This will be my 20th year now. So that makes me a dinosaur. And I worked in the industry back in the day where we could unironically use marquee and blink tags and be paid for it. And you will never take that away from me. That was what the golden age. What a time to be alive. In all of that time, I've worn an awful lot of hats. I've been a designer, a manager, a front-ender, a frontliner. I've been a UX consultant. I've been a writer. Every one of those roles has something in common, and that is you have to deal with people along the way. In those hats, I've worked for a whole bunch of different organizations. So large corporations, freelancing by myself, startups, web agencies, all of those places, same thing again. You got to deal with people. In those organizations, I've met a whole bunch of really great people. People that I remember that kind of stick with you. You've worked with someone who's helped you along and helped you grow as a person, technically in your role, or just as a person around your role. You will always remember the people that helped you along. And you will always remember the assholes that didn't, because they exist too, and I've met an awful lot of them. Now, one little disclaimer, and the reason why I feel like I may be okay to be entitled to be standing up here is that I used to be an asshole too. And I think that there are certain opportunities for me to kind of step away from that. No, but it's important to say that, you know, I stand up here and talk about this because I have an interest in fixing things that I know I've done poorly in the past. In dealing with people, you let your pride or your ego get in the way of being able to have a good conversation with someone or approach resolution in a technical situation. A challenge needs to come up, and unfortunately, you put yourself in the way of being able to get to the core of the problem. So that's who I am. That's why we're here. And I am sorry that that picture isn't showing up. That makes me feel like an awful lot of my really nice pictures aren't going to show up. But if you can't see what's going on the right, I will tell you as we go into each of our slides. So the first thing that we want to talk about here is communication. I will just stop at this point and say that I took all of 5 minutes to filter my slides into 4 neat buckets in a little card sorting exercise I did at home. Communication, empathy, oh, this is testing me. Teaching and learning, and awareness. And awareness is the bucket that I threw everything else in. As with a card sorting exercise, there's always a whole pile of shit that you just sweep into a little bag at the end, and that was that one. But it seemed to work, and I'm going to run with it. But right now we're going to talk about the first cab off the rank in communication. This is a really important skill, and spoiler alert, I'm probably going to say that line at the start of every one of these slides. But communication and how you deliver what it is that you need to say is excruciatingly important. And there have been some scientific studies that have come back with some really fascinating results. And I only discovered this when I looked into it, but how you get your message across isn't achieved just necessarily in the words that you say. There's a hell of a lot more to it. There was a guy called Albert Morabian, and he conducted a test which has been wildly misquoted, and I'm about to do the same, where his results, his study looked into how people tried to communicate their emotions and feelings in a situation in person to someone else, and how that other person responded to it. And he measured 3 vehicles for communication at that point: the tone of voice, the body language, and the words that were used. He said there's a percentage breakdown out of 100 for all of those 3 things that contributed to the other person liking the message that was put across. I'm trying to stay on topic with what he says because it's very easy to misrepresent this, but it is an indication that can't be disputed. And it turns out that 93% of your meaning when you communicate with someone is communicated aside from the words that you used, and 7% comes down to the words that you used. And I found that pretty staggering. So that means that I could be standing here mumbling, but if I use the right body language and the tone that goes on top of it, maybe you still kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to say. You can communicate an awful lot through tone of voice, through body language, because people look to these things. And when you're not consciously trying to wield these things as a part of communication, you force the audience to start filling in the gaps for you. So if you just stand there and talk with a monotone, and this is all I'm going to be delivering, and you may be a subject matter expert on something, but if you're not focusing on driving that emphasis and that meaning with what you say out into the conversation, then you put a lot of extra work onto the person that is receiving what it is that you have to say. So how you say something, how you deliver it, means more than just the words that you use as you push it across. Now, a lot of these slides, as we go through them, are going to seem kind of like, this is really obvious, or this seems like common sense. I am aware of the fact that if I fold my arms and stand like this, then people are going to crack the shits, and obviously I'm not engaged in the conversation. But I put these things up to say that not necessarily this is a laundry list that you need to run through and say, I need to be a better person, so I'm going to remember to clutch the lectern aggressively and make serious faces while I talk. It's more just to kind of roll a snowball in here so you get an idea of all the things that come together and the common theme that binds them. Something I want to step aside and just acknowledge here before we carry on. Your written voice has a tone too. This is really important. It's very easy to see a space to upload a picture as an avatar in Slack and then rely on that as a shield for you to have to give a shit about how you come across to someone. It's really important that you consider that even though we don't have the opportunity to venture body language and tone of voice over text or email or Slack or whatever, how you use the mediums that you have left still contributes to a written tone, I should say. And so you need to put just as much work in there. If you're not thinking about how you phrase your words, or if you're not putting the time in to get your point across, or you're leaving out punctuation, there's a whole bunch of different ways that contribute to a written tone, just as important as a verbal tone. So think about just stepping back and having a look at how you put things across and being on the receiving end of it. This is a common theme that's going to pop up throughout. On the other half of communication, we have the notion of being a good listener. And straight off the bat, there's more to listening than just using your ears to accept words into your head. Decent listening, active listening is more than this. It's about accepting the words in your head, but also taking time to process them, acknowledge them, reframe them, and while you're doing this, demonstrate to the person that's talking to you that you're still there and you're doing this and you're interested in what they're saying. So body language comes back into play at that point. I am interested, I am willing to be a part of this conversation. You as a speaker are, it's worth your time to continue because I am a captive audience. And then at the end of this, the real kicker, in some way or another, as part of your little back and forth, your repertoire with this person, try and demonstrate that what went into your head can come back out in some sort of useful form. If that's not just standing there and saying, if I understand this right, what you've just said is blah, 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 at least carrying the conversation forward to say, hey, we're on that page together, let's push to the next one. So the combination of being a thoughtful speaker and being an active listener makes you a really strong and weaponized force, just in the basic art of being a decent person in human communication. That is a picture of Donald Trump on the right there. I'm I'm going to do this now because I can't see him. We want to stop at this point for the last leg of our communications round to just cover off a couple of don'ts, maybe, and things to look out for when you're dealing with people in situations. So the first and the second, I guess, are kind of related. So interrupting and tailgating, when you're talking with someone or they're talking with you, if you dive in partway through what you're saying, it's a very quick way to let them know. If we're breaking in on what someone else is saying, it's a very quick way to let them know that we don't necessarily care about where they were going with that. And therefore, what they'd said up until that point probably wasn't as important either. And kind of a more insidious cousin of the same concept is tailgating. It's where you do wait for someone to finish, or when you think that they're due to finish, and jump right in on that point there and say, I'm going to start talking now. And that is similar. It's at least you've assumed on their part where you think that they're going to stop talking, and you've dived right in and said, I don't necessarily respect your right for people to stop and sponge what you just said, because what I'm saying couldn't wait, and I'm going to dive in and just go for it. Hyperbole is the absolute worst. It's significantly number one on a top 10 list of all-time shit things that you could ever do. Hyperbole, for those that don't know, is when you don't just, you use a gradation of something to describe it. You use the absolute, you go to the extreme. So it's not that something is bad, it is the shittest. It's not that something is good, it is literally the best thing I have ever done. This is a little bit, I kind of threw this one in because it's worth mentioning, but what it exposes you to is if you wield your hyperbolic skills too often, think of it like slapping important tags on every declaration in your CSS. And you know that when you do this, it's kind of like saying, well, in CSS, if everything is important, nothing is important. And there's nothing more infuriating than wading through a whole pile of things that are competing to be the most important, or the best, or the biggest, or the greatest, and trying to figure out what is actually legitimately at the top of that scale. Speaking with hyperbole is exactly the same thing. If you try and drive, if we say that everything is going to be the most extreme, it becomes a lot harder to actually discern the truth. And so it makes it just a little bit harder for your listener to be able to pick up on that. This last one's a little bit of fun, and I was unsure about whether or not to put this one in, but there's a concept of upspeak. And you may have picked up on this one when you've spoken with people somewhere along your journeys. But it is the annoying habit of raising your voice just a little bit at the end of your sentences. I was hesitant to put this one in because it felt like a bit of a nothing thing that maybe was just something that got on my nerves a little bit, but there are a bunch of articles, and it's growing in popularity that this is a real thing. Not only is it a real thing, but it's a real Australian thing. This is something that pops up a lot. And the reason why you don't want to do it is because it suggests to the person that you're talking to that you don't actually believe what you're saying, and you need them to validate the authority of what you've just driven ahead with when you've opened your mouth. And that's why you want to avoid it, because it reduces your own credibility. It takes away the thunder of you being an authority on a given subject, and it makes life harder again for your audience to believe you as a genuine person speaking their mind about something. We're going to step into stage 2 and talk about empathy. Empathy is a really powerful skill, I think, that kind of bleeds into everything else. Empathy is the ability to step out of your own viewpoint and look at a situation or a problem or a challenge in the context of someone else's observations and ability to pick up on that. So that pops up everywhere. That's a really important characteristic and a skill that you can develop in yourself. It's really easy. It just takes a snap moment of reflection to say, I have an opinion on this thing, and I'm just going to put that aside for the moment and say, I'm just going to look at it from where you come from on this and see if that changes how I feel about something. The important thing to look at here is that empathy doesn't require you to feel the pain of the person that you're speaking to, but to at least acknowledge that that pain exists. So you don't have to dive in and just start weeping with them over the frustration of something, but it's important to at least dive in there and say, I'm aware of the shitness that you are dealing with in this situation, and I will roll that into my understanding of the situation. And now, using my subject matter expertise, I might be able to do something with that. Empathy is the art of doing that as often as you can in as many situations as possible. Dealing with people, working on things. As a UX person, if you're involved in this sort of thing, it's impossible to do your job without this as part of your role. And I would argue that any discipline in our industry escapes the need for empathy. I would argue that there is no discipline that could escape the need for empathy. So you want to try and dig for understanding where you can. Ask the sort of questions of people that you're dealing with, people that deal with your tools, the sort of things that would elicit an emotional response, a feeling, some indication of context, to build that understanding, that empathetic investigation that it is that you're working for. Because it's really hard once you start getting into the habit of using empathy to drive the work that you do in every situation, to then avoid doing something with that information. It's impossible to ignore when you start to appreciate someone else's circumstance. I have a fantastic quote from Barack Obama here. He said, "When you think like this, when you choose to broaden your ambit of concern and empathize with the plight of others, whether they are close friends or distant strangers, it becomes harder not to act. It becomes harder not to help." Did I look and sound like Barack Obama then? Because I really channeled that one. I really felt that. Empathy is something that I think is professionally very important, because it not only contributes to how we deal with situations in front of us, how we deliver products for customers, but also in how we actually engage with the people that we work with and become harmonious in a team environment or a business environment. So day to day, you will find this sort of situation arises where you might be an authority on something. You might be a subject matter expert, and people will respect you for that. But you might also have a reputation of being someone who's a subject matter expert who is a little bit difficult to get that information out of. It's like, oh, please don't go and bug him. He's the only guy that knows how the system works. Just kind of wait. He might document that in a week or something like that. Like that's a frustrating situation that does exist. What I'm challenging everybody to do is just to think a little bit more. If you are an authority on a particular subject, try to meet people outside of the confines of your own little mind prison. It's important to be able to take your ideas and shape them into a context that matches someone else when they come to visit you and learn from you about something. So it's about getting out of your own head with your ideas, shaping them in a language that someone else will understand, and taking it into their world, rather than just sitting there with your arms folded and going, please step into my filthy little mental den and try and pick an understanding out of this shit show of thoughts that I have rattling around in my head. And this, as I said before, it bleeds into everything. This is really, it's an everything skill. So the beauty of it is it's particularly easy. It takes half a second to stop, park your ideas, and look to someone else for it. A couple of gotchas. Self-congratulation can be a good sign of someone who is in a situation incapable of necessarily understanding the full context of what someone else might be expecting from them. And that's a really complicated way for me to say very little. I'll give you an example of where this might work. So you might see when you're in a particular area on a discussion channel or a forum or a Stack Overflow post or something like that, someone will come in with a particular challenge. And let me just paint a picture for you and see if I can get anybody to cringe a little bit. The question might be, hey, I have a problem getting this jQuery plugin to work for IE8 on this government project. Can somebody please help me implement this? Now, if the response came back that would represent someone in a self-congratulatory point, it would be, oh, that's great. Yeah, I remember working in government. Yeah, government was really hard. I worked there for 3 years. I appreciate the challenges. Someone else might come in on this second point, missing the point and running with it, and say, why are you using jQuery, man? Like, IE8's not supported. What are you doing here? You know, that's totally the wrong thing. You should check out this library or something that's got nothing to do with what you're looking for. This happens all the time. These two things happen all the time. These people have, I guess the best way to put it, looked at a problem, been posed a problem, ventured a problem, and decided, I don't like that because I'm not in it. I need to put myself in that situation, and now I can solve that problem because it's mine, and it's not yours anymore. It's awful. In my opinion. Sorry, I get a little bit ranty about this because, oh, whew, and breathe. So I guess to sum up those first two, and this third one here, which I really don't think needs any introduction, I hope, is a lot of these problems will arise when we look at a situation and decide that we need to be in it. And conveniently, the situation is easily solved when we pull ourselves out of it and just look at the materials that we have in front of us. Mansplaining, a specific kind of condescension that is based in the often unconscious social assumption that men speak with authority and women do not. Anyone have a problem with that concept? Shouldn't be a thing. Unfortunately, it is. We have people circulating, sorry?
I put my hand up, but I realized what you said.
Oh, yes, okay, no. I love it. Woohoo! Jeez. I was not ready for that at all. We're in a situation where this is unfortunately a thing, and it is a thing that has earned itself a term, and that term has found its way into the dictionary, and that dictionary term is probably one like Word of the Year 2017, because that's how rife this is. If you ever find yourself in a situation, gentlemen, where you feel that you might need to explain something to someone, and that someone happens to be female, check first that they asked for your input. Check again that you can actually contribute something if that input was welcome. Just, if you're in doubt at all at any point, just stop. Don't double down on it. Don't be that guy recently who was teaching how the vagina works to a leading female gynecologist. Like that is, like there's a self-awareness there that is thoroughly absent. Read the room, damn it, please. It's worth kind of just tagging something on the back of this. There is, mansplaining has a very kind of situation-specific implementation, but splaining in general can also apply in situations that are not necessarily male to female. It might be that someone will mansplain to another male. That happens. It might be that someone might explain as a junior to a senior, and you kind of just sit there and be like, thank you for your help. Thank you, that's really lovely. I appreciate that. Just try, take a step back, check and see if you need it at that point. It's all about kind of making that judgment call, but be conservative with your decisions at that point. It's usually with that kind of blindness, that diving in, that Mel Gibson-esque kind of freedom, charge into being the person that nobody asked for an opinion from, that starts to fall to shit. Moving on to the third of our 4 categories here, and I will try and speed this up because I appreciate how slow I'm going. Teaching and learning. I really feel a lot about this because as I was mentioning at the start, I have a deep affection for the handful of people in my life over 20 years who took the time to teach me things, and not only teach me things, but teach me things relevant to what I was doing, relevant to how I needed to learn. They looked at my situation and had a clever appreciation for where I was coming from rather than what needed to be taught. And so I see learning as this powerful and significant contributor to our own satisfaction, both professionally and just in life. If we ever stop learning, things get really dull. And you can communicate a whole bunch of different things. You can share your expertise, your professionalism, your life lessons, all sorts of different things can be shared in this teacher-learner kind of situation. And you should open yourself up at every stage of your career, at any point, to the opportunity to learn from anyone. Because it helps you, it helps the people that you work with, and it just helps us as a room full of people collectively as a part of an industry. When we are actively sharing with each other, we just get better and everybody's happier with each other. It's so nice. So think of this as a counterpoint. Have you ever seen a post on Stack Overflow where someone poses a problem and no one responds to it, except the person that posted it who comes in and says, it's all right, I figured it out, and then just disappears? And you're like, you go, oh, you son of a bitch. It's like, I really needed help, and you're the only post out there that seems to come even close to describing my problem, and you've left. Just share, please. Oh, I'm getting the red mist again. It's happening. Teaching and learning has a more direct form in constructive criticism. Sometimes we need to be the authority in a situation, and we know that we have an idea of how something needs to be fixed, and we've seen someone else that might have fallen by the wayside in that particular area. It happens to all of us. We all break stuff. How we react and respond to that, I will get to later. But I'm drawn to a particular example in my past. When I was in my first week working at iNet as a junior web developer, the first week there, the first Friday at 5 p.m., I ripped down the public website and just broke it outright. As I was sitting there at 5 p.m. with beer in hand, very excited about my new job, I pulled down the website that got a hell of a lot of traffic at any given point. And what strikes me about that situation was not how much I was bricking it at that point because of what I'd done in my first week, was how my team stood behind me, all with their beers in hand, and just kind of chuckled along. And you're like, it's cool, man, don't worry about it. Here, you might want to consider doing it. I'm sitting there like, okay, what do I do next? What do I do next? And they're like, it's cool. Don't worry about it, we'll fix this. Maybe it's something. And what struck me about that moment was that nobody was standing there and saying to me, you have broken this is your fault. They depersonalized it and said, that is unfortunate, the website broke and you happened to be there while it happened. I guess that kind of association was clear to me, but no one needed to reiterate it to me. I felt okay to just be dealing with the problem rather than dealing with the fact that I had earned a horrible reputation at the same time as dealing with the problem, or that I'd been associated as being at fault. That's a bad look, and it's not good for anyone. So try and depersonalize a situation. When you need to dive in and criticize somebody for something, a criticism is a good thing in the right circumstances. Ask any designer kind of climbing up through the ranks how important criticism is and how important it is to try and respond to it healthily. It's an art. And so dishing out criticism is just as difficult a challenge. So we need to take away the need to put the person in with the problem. Pull the person away and say, hey, the problem needs to be resolved, and you and I are here right now, we're going to fix it together. So use your empathy to work together on this, rather than to isolate someone and identify them as a part of the problem when they're really not. A last part of teaching and learning, we're going to talk about adapting to change, rolling with the punches. Change, as we all know, when it happens, can be a little bit bristly. Like, you will feel like there are things that are a threat to you and what you have earned and the station that you have achieved. You were happily cruising along your information superhighway and just being really good at your job, and someone added an extra lane to it. Or, it could be as simple as a deadline changing, or it could be as complex as, hey, that ISP you work for just got bought out by a larger telco. These sorts of things happen, and they will happen. Change is a constant. It's a universal. And if you're not flexible to be able to deal with these things, you get left behind. If you can't adapt to the idea that change is coming and it is an opportunity for you to grow along with it, when you meet it head on with enthusiasm, you are just becoming obsolete. So think of it this way. It was put to me in a job recently, someone who has fought hard to maintain a job that they worked at for 20 years that has remained fundamentally unchanged, that has had no turbulence along the way. As unlikely as that is in our industry, doesn't have 20 years of experience. They probably have 20 years of 1 year's experience doing their job, which I thought was kind of cool. It's a really nice way to look at it because of the absence of embracing change as a part of their work. So it's important to keep challenging yourself and be open to it and take it with some enthusiasm, no matter how shitty it might seem. Last section we're going to dive into is on awareness. And the first thing I want to talk about is how to have a good argument. This will pop up all the time. And an argument is a good thing in its barest form. The difference between a good and a bad argument is how much you put yourself into that situation. So a good argument is where you come to a problem and you need to see that it needs to be resolved, and someone else meets from a different angle and says, I have a different perspective on this. And the two of you put all of your toys in and you crack them together until you come away and go, you know what, this is something that I can work towards. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but we have some sort of compromise here. We have a solution that we have met our heads on and seems to be a decent fit for now. A bad argument is the same situation, except instead of putting your toys in the ring, you put yourself in there and said, I need to be right in this situation, and I need you to be wrong, or I need you to see that I'm right and say it. So I guess, again, this point comes up. You need to be empathetic in this situation. Pull yourself out, pull the need for you to be a part of the problem out of the situation and decomplicate it. So just advocate your point of view. You don't have to be right, you just have to be speaking your mind on something. And it will be far faster, far easier for you to get to a point of resolution. Because somewhere in the gray, there's going to be an answer. And it saves everybody a heap of time and a heap of hassle, and there's a lot less people getting pissed off at each other. But if you feel that that situation is not necessarily within control, then back away, regroup. It's not always going to happen as nicely as I'm describing it here, but it is something to aspire to. Next one's a big one. Be accountable, be responsible for the work that you do. If you're in a culture where that isn't allowed, or if it's encouraged to do otherwise, or if you find yourself surrounded by people who will quite happily throw you under the bus, a culture of blame, or even the presence of a single blame thrower in your office can make it very hard for anyone to feel confident about operating in that environment. If I want to be innovative, if I want to be progressive, suggest new things, anything that might represent taking a risk, I will feel really cautious about doing that in an environment where someone will seize on that and use it against me. Because it's a big discouragement. It is a toxic environment. It also helps at the other end when you take responsibility for the results of your work, good or otherwise. It paints a good picture about you as a person. It says that you have good moral character and that you can be accountable. You can be relied on to do things, and the things that come out of your mouth are trustworthy. This last one, that's Deadpool, by the way. This is a really good picture. Damn it. So this one is about picking your battles. This is the last slide before we do the big old wrap up. But it's nice in these situations where you feel the presence of people around you who are just wrong. Like, people can just be wrong sometimes. You just need to be like the guy that's pointing that out. In a situation where you feel like you need to wade in and represent a point or achieve something or enact something in the business or in the real world where something needs to happen and isn't happening now, and you want to be the driver for that change, ask yourself 3 things before you wade in on this and be the person that decided to start that battle. Do you stand to gain something from it? What do you stand to gain from doing so? If it's not material, maybe it's not necessarily worth the effort, or it's disproportionately not going to benefit you for what you do stand to gain. Secondly, do you get a reputation for doing this thing? Are you going to be the X person that did this thing and now has to wear that label forever, regardless of what it is that you went to achieve? And the last point, if you do have a problem that you need to be resolved, are you going to be the driver for change once that problem has been ventured, or are you just going to be the person that ventured the problem? There is a big difference between bringing someone a problem and saying, hey, I reckon I can help you with the solution. So think about those 3 things before you decide to be the squeaky wheel. I can't tell if that actually works, what I've just said. That analogy feels better in my head. But you get the point that I'm trying to make. If you want to make noise about something, be prepared to back it up and be prepared to wear the consequences. And so for that reason, there are circumstances where you might want to not dive in on something, but it helps you be a little bit more scientific about how you do approach the things that you do. So to wrap things up, for communication, it's not what you have to say, it's how you choose to say it. Because in the absence of you being able to try for these things and actually put yourself in a position where you want to communicate something using every tool in your arsenal, people will do that for you. They'll fill in the gaps and say, okay, you are this sort of person, you don't seem to care as much about this subject. So think about how you come across when you choose to speak and when you choose to listen. Both sides of the equation are important here, and you need to be actively engaged in these things to become a better version of yourself. We can be a complete communicator very easily just by stepping back and saying, this is how I come across in these situations. A wrap up for empathy. This one's really easy. It's so huge at the same time. Step out of your own head and look at the world from the viewpoint of others. Take what you see from that perspective and what you've learned from questions that you've asked in that area, pull it back into your own head and operate from there on. It's not enough to be a subject matter expert on something and just assume that that is everything that you need to be able to diagnose a situation and then act on it. Teaching and learning and growing makes us happier. You need to open yourself up to the opportunity that you can learn and teach. And I might just want to add at this point, there isn't a sort of person that you can't learn from. A senior can learn from a junior, an executive can learn from a frontline starter, because they will have perspectives and viewpoints from their journey getting up to that point, even if it's very short-lived, that someone else will not have. You only have to look at our industry. Someone that starts now, a junior in their first year, will have a thoroughly different experience to the first year I had in 1999, like completely different. And I have a lot to learn from people going through those motions. I can't do that now. And so you need to open yourself up to the likelihood that you can dig things out of anyone. Everything is a learning opportunity. And for awareness, please just keep an open mind. Be observant, be patient, step back, be cautious, understand a situation before you decide to wade in on it. Think about how you approach different situations differently, if that makes sense. Put together a brand for yourself and just roll with it. This is about, and I will just kind of lead into the last slide for this one, thinking outside yourself. Just be relaxed about it. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It's not a laundry list of checkbox items that say, I need to be doing this thing here, and Niaal said that I got to give a firm handshake and talk with a deeper voice or something like that to get my point across. No, it's just about being the same person that you are, but thinking a little bit more about whether or not you'd be happy with that. So think about when you're talking with someone, would you be happy for that to be directed at you? Are you happy with the package that you present to the world? So there's no need to be someone else. There's no need to drive yourself as a remade person. It's to be exactly who you are now. You don't need to be super charismatic for all the D20 rollers out there. It's just about being the you that you'd be okay with being on the receiving end of. And that's where I'm going to call to an end. So thank you, everybody. If there's any questions? No. Excellent. Thank you.